Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Notice of Procedural Safeguards, What You Need to Know, Part 3. So in the series, we are on Part 3 of 4. And today, we're going to cover the topics that we have left, but we're going to leave the actual dispute options till 2 weeks' time. So please take a look at this and let's get started. So about me, briefly, you've seen it before, but I'm not an attorney. This isn't legal advice for your child. I'm a non-attorney representative and special education advocate in Texas. So we're going to talk about this document in particular that was put together by TEA to inform parents of their rights under the Notice of Procedural Safeguards. So the issues with this document are that it is plucked straight from the law. And obviously that can be confusing for a lot of people. It's not very user-friendly, generally confusing. Usually you may admit to not having read it or looked at it before you went to an ARD meeting. So today we're going to talk about that. The learning objectives are, as always, for you to be able to explain what your rights are, to understand the verbiage in the Notice of Procedural Safeguards, we'll call it NOPS for short, and to be able to use this information in an ARD meeting. So what we're going to cover today is voluntary private school placements by parents, the transfer of parental rights, and resolving disagreements. I've decided to cut resolving disagreements into 2 sections. So we're just going to briefly overview disagreements and talk about formal and informal strategies for that and options. Does this sound like fun? I hope so. The idea is that you'll be riding on top of the waves instead of being underwater. And of course, I have an action item for you, which is to join my Underwater with SPED group on Facebook. So if you'd like to do that, it's a good place to ask questions in a private setting. No answer is considered out of the realm of possibility or education. So you can just ask any question you want. No question is too ignorant or as you may feel yourself, but you can ask anything at all and it gets answered directly. So today we're going to talk about placement. So this is when you decide that your child should be in a private school. There are 3 factors to consider. First of all, you have no beef with the school, the public school. You decide to put your child in a private school because that's what you prefer. So there's no dispute on the table. Your child is in private school and you're happy with that. The issue is your school district, as we discussed before, and any of the school districts are committed to having to find children who need special education. And if they're not going to enroll in the school district within the catchment, then they have to provide proportionate share services. So proportionate share is when your child is in a school district, but they're not enrolled, they're in a private school within the catchment. That school has a responsibility to provide proportionate share services, which are not special education to meet unique needs, but they are special education. So your child could receive speech services or dyslexia services. Unilateral placement at disagreement, however, is something completely different. This is when you have a child that's enrolled in the school district, and that school district has failed, in your opinion, to provide a free, appropriate public education. And in that case, you can notify the school that you're going to withdraw your child and place them in a private setting, and that you expect the public school to pay for that. So let's get into more detail on those topics. First of all, if you place your child in a private school, where is the location? So it may not be in the public school location that your child is zoned for. So if it's in a different area, like let's say you live in Y district and your child is zoned for Y elementary school, but you send your child to a private school in X district, then X district has to consider your child for an individual services plan. So typically, the catchment area is what determines who is responsible for providing those proportionate share services. And so what the district does is they tell the state, we have X number of kids, we have 100 kids who we've identified under Child Find, and we need to provide them with an individual service plan. And so that money that they receive from the state is divided up between those 100 kids. And every year they decide on a priority area. It may be speech, it may be dyslexia, it may be occupational therapy. That looks different and can look different every year. And again, it's not individualized to your child. It's individualized in terms of what they've decided for all children. So your child gets that service individually, but it's not individualized to that your child's needs. So placement, when you disagree with the free, appropriate public education of your child, there's no referral by the school district to a private school. And so you are telling the school, I'm putting you on notice that you're not providing what's appropriate. And I'm going to put my child in a private school. And I expect you to pay for everything related to my child's private services. And so you're going to send in what's called a 10-day notice of private placement. And that is a business day placement. And it has to be sent 10 business days before you take that action. So that could happen in the summer because it's not school days. There are other scenarios where you could inform the school district that you've made this decision. And those are in an odd meeting. You've told them that, hey, this is not working for my child. I'm going to put them in this private school. They get better services. Or you've sent that notice of evaluation, but both of those have to happen, or one of each has to happen. And the reason is because there are limitations to what a school district has to provide or reimburse if you haven't done either of those things. And in Texas, if you go to a mediation and you say, look, I pulled my kid, I put them in this private school, the school can say, well, you never told us you were unhappy, and so we're just not going to do anything about it. And so either at mediation or due process, there can be a determination that's made to not reimburse at 100%. Now, the school, you could make an argument, the school did not let me know. They didn't tell me I had to let them know. They didn't provide me with the Notice of Procedural Safeguards. So this responsibility to notify the school is in this document. And if they've given you the NOPS, then you're probably going to lose on having not notified the school. Because technically, if they provided you with the Notice of Procedural Safeguards, then they've given you the notice that you have to let them know. So that can be an issue. Now, what isn't in the NOPS is a school district can place a child in a private school and develop an IEP with the private school. Now, that rarely happens in Texas. In other states, it does happen where there are specialized or and numerous private placements where the child could receive a FAPE. And it is actually outlined in the continuum of placement. So if you look under IDEA, you'll see that non-public day school is one of the placements. And so usually when I ask for that in an odd meeting, somebody rolls their eyes and tries to pretend that I didn't say it, because in Texas we have very few options for private placements, and usually school districts want what's called a divorce, meaning they want you to never come back, or they don't want you to come back within 3 years. So that continuum of placements is definitely limited in Texas. And that's why I put it in red, because it's not in the NOPS. So by the development of an IEP, you can, in the ODD meeting, you can let them know that what they're doing is not providing a FAPE. And you can tell them at that time, this is not appropriate. It's not going to meet my child's needs. I'm going to have to put them in a private school. And so that's where you would do it. And you would do it as soon as you disagree. So as long as you get it on the record, that's important. You could put it in a parent statement of disagreement. But there are numerous times that you could notify them that that's what you're considering. So how can you use this in an ODD meeting or in parent groups or in the community? So I found that a lot of parents don't know about this 10-day notice requirement. They're also afraid to send it in because they think maybe that it requires them to immediately withdraw their child, and that's not true. You just have to make sure that you've notified the school. It's a placeholder. You may decide to keep your child in the school district if they try and fix the issues. You may decide that you want to keep your child in the district for another 75 days because you can't find anywhere to place your child. So those are some considerations. So that should be shared with any parent that you know that absolutely is not aware of these considerations. So in an ODD meeting, you can use this information to inform the ODD committee that you understand your rights and that your child does not have to persist in an environment where their needs aren't being met. So we're going to move on to transfer of parental rights. So this simply means that when your child meets the age of majority, which in Texas is 18, those educational rights transfer to them. So you can imagine that if your child now has educational rights, they can decide if they want to be in special education, they want you in the meeting. They want certain services, or they don't want certain services. They have full control over the IEP and what it contains. So I put supported decision-making agreements at the bottom because in Texas, this is an important tool. If your child is willing to have you help them make decisions in an ARD meeting, then this is an easy document that you can execute. It can be downloaded from the ARC of Texas. Disability rights also have a version of this, but simply your child checks boxes on what they want you to help them with, and then you get it notarized in front of a notary or another kind of witness. So you have this document, you can go into the ARD meeting, and you can help your child make decisions without being challenged by the school. So transfer of rights, what happens? So on or before your child's 17th birthday, you're going to get a notice from the school that says in a year's time, we're going to be transferring rights to your child. And this notice has to have a description of what that means, what it looks like, that you can obtain guardianship or alternatives, where you can find other services to explain this. And they have to document all of this in the IEP. So usually it's on a page of the IEP, just as you would see prior written notice or any other consideration. It's in the IEP. So what does this mean? When you see this document or this transfer of rights notice, this is kind of like a shot across the bow. You and your child have to get together and determine your involvement in their education once they turn 18. Some children turn 18 in the first semester of 12th grade. So that would be an issue. Now, if your child is younger than that, then you're going to be in those ARD meetings through the end, or you're going to be in those ARD meetings where they decide to go to the 18 plus program or not graduate and continue with high school through 22. So it's very important to have those conversations and talk about guardianship, which means you have legal authority to make decisions for them, or the other alternatives like power of attorney or supported decision-making agreements. So let's look at those options more closely. I recommend that you talk to an attorney about these three options. Some of the information that I have is guardianship can be limited to education, that you can have guardianship that is not all-encompassing regarding your child's life. Schools do have to respect power of attorney, durable power of attorney in terms of educational rights. So that's something to talk to an attorney about. So find an attorney that specializes in these types of life decisions and see what you can execute, but make sure that these are executed either on the 18th birthday or prior to, with the rights transferring to you at 18. So at 18, the school has to provide you with that same information we talked about that they give you at 17. But at this point, they're informing you that the transfer has taken place. So your child is now 18. They don't have to consult with you on decisions. They do have to send you notices. That is required, but they don't have to consult with you on actual educational decisions. So how could you use this information, and how could this change plans for your child's future? Well, you may decide that your child is not ready to graduate and that they need to be in that 18 plus program. you may decide that because rights were transferred to them at 18, that the transition planning is not aggressive enough, or it's not intensive enough in terms of support or services. How can you use this information? You can share it with other parents who have high school aged children. You have 4 short years to work out how you're going to help your child at 18. And, I've had parents come to me and they had no clue that their child could revoke special education at 18. And of course, that's a big consideration. Are they fed up with the services? They're not helping? Is there a possibility that they could just exit themselves from special education? In that case, you need to go back to the drawing board on transition and make sure it's something that they're invested in. So the next topic is resolving disagreements. There are 4 formal options for resolving disagreements, and I'm going to cover 3 of them in the next webinar. And the reason for that is there's a lot to cover in regards to mediation, state complaints, and due process hearings. And there is an interrelationship between the 3. And so we'll discuss that in the next webinar. But for today, there are 4 formal options. All of the timelines are in calendar days. What's the importance of this? Well, you can actually make complaints in the summer, and those timelines will keep running. They're not going to stop because the school year is out. So, for example, with a special education complaint, it's 60 calendar days. With a due process hearing, it's 75, give or take any adjustments to the timeline, which could speed it up or slow it down. And then you have your informal options, which the NOPS actually does not get into. But the great thing about the NOPS, the great thing about informal options is you can try and resolve things at the yard table with administration, and we can get into some of the strategies for that are not included in the NOPS. So you got voluntary and involuntary disagreements options. So voluntary are the things that the school has to agree to. So they would have to agree to state facilitation, sending a facilitator to the ARD meeting to help run through the processes in a methodical way to try and reach an agreement. Involuntary is due process and a state complaint. Once you file those, the school district doesn't have an option not to respond. They have to respond. I mean, they may try and get them dismissed with either evidence or a motion to dismiss or some kind of response that implies that there are no issues under IDEA Part B. But those 2 options are involuntary. They have to go forward. So timelines. Let's talk about timelines. Special education complaints, 60 days, calendar days, and due process is 75 days. So due process depends on a lot of things. You have to have a resolution meeting within 15 days, and you may waive that and decide to go to mediation. The resolution period is 30 days, and after that, the hearing officer has 45 school days to issue a decision. Now, what can happen is this timeline can be altered by asking for motions for continuance. So illness, the school's attorney being out of town, the hearing officer not being available, a mediation that's going to happen outside of the 30-day resolution timeline. There are all kinds of factors and variables to the due process timeline. So there is an opportunity to resolve issues at that resolution meeting in 15 days, which makes it a much quicker option than a special education complaint. So for the purposes of today, state IEP facilitation. So essentially, IEP facilitation means a facilitator comes in and they try to help the school and the parent reach a consensus. So you would request one in between the IEP meeting and the next IEP meeting to try and reach consensus. And you have to request one within 5 days of that second meeting from the state. Now, it has to be a joint request by the school and the parents. So again, it's voluntary. The school may disagree with that. Some schools will suggest that you get a facilitator from the region. So Region 13 has facilitators as well, and those people come in and they try to assist with the process of the ARD meeting. There are limitations to what they can do in that ARD meeting. They cannot address manifestation determination reviews or interim alternative education services or placement. Additionally, this facilitation, you can't request one if you've already filed a TEA complaint, or you've already filed for due process, or you already have a mediation. So this facilitation cannot exist in combination with any other dispute options. So how can you use this information? Now, we haven't talked about informal options. They're not noted in the procedural safeguards. But essentially, if you can try and resolve things at the ARD table level, then you're a lot better off. And some of the ways that you can influence an ARD committee are to bring additional data to the first ARD meeting. So the ARD meeting where you're supposed to consider present levels, where you're supposed to consider what an appropriate annual goal might be, you could bring your outside people, your outside providers. You could bring video of your child at home that proves a baseline. You could bring those to the ARD committee. And this would help you avoid having to ask for facilitation. So what are the pitfalls of the voluntary options? Well, first of all, you can't go ahead with them unless the school agrees. And so those are something to consider. Should you even ask for them? Are they worth pursuing, or should you go straight to the involuntary options? And of course, that is something that you could troubleshoot and discuss with an advocate or an attorney. So hopefully this webinar today has unraveled some of the legalese. I apologize for my voice, which is I'm recovering from a really bad cold. But if this helped you in any way with those sections of the Notice of Procedural Safeguards, then please use them with the school district. So you've made it to the end. My website on Facebook is at Make SPED Better. You're welcome to follow it. I do post micro videos on different topics. Additionally, I have a private group called Underwater with SPED, where you can ask questions, and sometimes I ask questions and then post an answer. So as always, reach out to me at info@lumenadvocacy.com, and I look forward to seeing you at the next our Notice of the Procedural Safeguards Part 4, where we get into more detail about what the dispute options look like. Thank you for joining me.